So first things first, um, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming and in such a short notice that we sent this invite. So we really appreciate your attendance for this important topic. My name is Hania De Vito. I am with the Third World Network, and today we'll have a discussion on the upcoming WHO Executive Board meeting that starts on February, and we'll discuss specifically the resolution on rare diseases, which is led by Egypt and Spain. So from the figures I could gather, 95% of rare diseases lack approved treatments, and a huge problem of this treatment that is available is the abusive prices of these medicines, particularly for low and middle income countries. So this resolution could be an opportunity, particularly for the compulsory license initiatives that are happening across the world. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleagues who compose this panel. First, we will welcome K.M. Gopakumar, Senior Researcher and Legal Advisor at TWN, followed by Adrián González, Research and Advocacy Manager at Salud por Derecho, then Chetali Rao, Senior Researcher at TWN, and lastly, but not least, Thiru Balasubramanian, Geneva representative of Knowledge Ecology International. And then we'll open for questions and comments. So please, Gopa, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Hania. Um, thanks, thank you once again for all of you to take time for this briefing session. The purpose of the briefing session is all of you are aware that there is a uh, draft resolution which is currently under negotiations among the member states. They would like to complete before the starting of EB this resolution on rare diseases. The most important problem with this resolution is that it is uh, very much silent on the issue of affordable access to medicines or diagnostics which are required to respond to rare diseases. It does talk about access in a very limited sense. It's basically urging member states to provide access. What are those medicines which are currently uh, essential medicine or which are currently cost-effective medicines and affordable medicines? That basically means there is no nudge or there is no pressure on countries to take law and policy measures to facilitate or to make sure that medicines are affordable. The only obligation, as I pointed out, is to work on to extend access to cost-effective medicines or which are already affordable. So there is no need or there is no direction to take law and policy measures to facilitate access to medicine by making it affordable. So this is the issue. So my colleagues are going to explain the next two presentations. They would explain um, the current situation where there are medicines available on certain rare diseases which are not affordable due to the monopoly, by and large related to due to the monopoly. So there is a need to take law and policy measures to address these monopoly practices and to make these medicines available at an affordable price. The resolution lacks that language, and in the absence of access to those medicines, the implementation of the resolutions became, a kind of a optics, and you will not achieve what you are really want to achieve in the area of rare diseases. So, against this background, um, uh, we are organizing this briefing session, which we hope that civil society organizations would exert pressure in the coming days and the months, so we could succeed in convincing our governments to incorporate certain languages which clearly mention on the issue of access to medicines which are currently unaffordable to most of the uh, people live with the rare diseases, especially those who are in the developing countries. So we also keep in mind this. Before this resolution, there was a UNGA resolution on rare diseases, which basically calls upon member states to progressively cover all the rare disease people with a effective and affordable and equitable access to treatments and diagnosis by 2030. Normally progressively achieve means it never reaches anywhere, but here they have put a timeline of 2030. But this resolution, now we are just 6 years away, is completely silent on this issue. So let me stop it here. So this is the context in which we are organizing this. I hope this briefing will lead to much more coordinated civil society action in this regard. With this hope, let me call Adrian to start with the presentation.
Thank you, Boba. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the organizers for inviting me to speak today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you're based today. And thanks for spending your time with us on this super relevant issue and silent issue, as Gopa was mentioning before. I have to apologize because I might have to leave the session before it ends, but I hope I can get to transmit some of the points that we've been making from Salud por Derecho, which is the organization I'm representing today, the points that we have trying to make to other groups and to the Spanish government as one of the co-sponsors of this resolution. I'm going to try to share my screen now. Just let me know if you can't see it. Okay, you should see it now, no? Okay, cool. Basically, the way we frame this, our advocacy approach has been just to highlight the lack of policy coherence in Spain's pharmaceutical policy landscape. Just as a very brief political background, Spain has at the moment a progressive coalition government since November 2019. Since the 2023 elections, there is a left-wing party or movement called Sumar that holds the Ministry of Health. With very high-level political figures from the Ministry of Health with a very long record of activism, defending the public healthcare system, promoting primary healthcare, and equitable access to healthcare in Spain. There's been also some high-level figures from the ministry that have showed in the past, and actually in the present, very progressive views on issues related to global health justice and equity, such as the role of IP in expanding access to medicines, and the need to ensure the use of TRIPS flexibilities, and a little bit of the background and history of the access to medicines movement. So we thought, when we heard for the first time that Spain was going to sponsor a resolution on rare diseases, that it was going to be an ambitious resolution on access to medicines and equitable access to healthcare. Also, to add on this political background, there's some policy background that I wanted to mention before getting into the more technical aspects that we focus on this resolution. At the national level, the current ministry started the review of the Evaluation of Health Technologies Act, basically the law that regulates how health technologies are evaluated and assessed. And according to the Vice Minister of Health, Javier Padilla, transparency is one of the 3 key pillars of this new act. And he has been very vocal in ensuring that the new legislation includes transparency over costs of development and production of new medicines in order to be assessed fairly. There's been some discussions on some mentions from the Ministry of Health regarding increasing transparency in the price setting mechanisms at the national level. Basically, that would mean, to start with, that they would stop appealing in court all the pro-transparency actions that civil society groups like Salud por Derecho have been carrying out in the last few years. We are still testing this out, so there's no updates on this. And more recently, the National Strategy for the Pharmaceutical Industry referenced DNDi and MPP as success models that could be replicated or that Spain could collaborate with in the future. So more transparency, more equitable access, and more knowledge on global health and access to medicines, basically. Furthermore, the development and production of affordable and accessible advanced therapies, it's a health and industrial priority for the government. And considering that most ATMPs or advanced therapies are considered orphan drugs or drugs that treat rare diseases, then to us it made sense that the resolution text promoted by Spain and Egypt would have more strong language on equitable access and the root causes of health inequities overall. At the international level, just a few quotes from People's Medicine Alliance. Javier Padilla Bernaldez, who is the Secretary of State, the Vice Minister of Health, said very recently in, I think it was UNAIDS Executive Board meeting, no country should be pressured if they choose to use the safeguards in the TRIPS agreement. So there's some precedent in the current ministry on how to use this, and they know the existence of these tools, which is something that was not the case in the past. Just to summarize some of the problems that the R&D model for rare diseases has, and this has something to do with the analysis that I'll present in a second, there's a few aspects that are critical that impede people to access orphan drugs. Basically, unaffordable prices that are promoted by patent monopolies, by market exclusivity rights, regulatory protection, and the orphan drug designation incentives that are set up in many countries, including the US, the European Union, Japan, and many others, that basically expand the monopoly of drugs, basically allowing drug developers to put the price tag that they want based on what the market will bear, which have led to cases like the most recent treatment to treat sickle cell disease being priced at $2 million per treatment, if I'm not mistaken. Another aspect is salami slicing, what's called salami slicing and indication stacking, basically subdividing diseases to obtain more orphan designations, which leads to more monopolies. And here's one case that I really like for what it shows. In the 1990s, Dapsone, which is usually used to treat pneumocystic pneumonia, which is associated with people living with HIV, obtained 2 orphan drug designations. And I highlight 1995, HIV crisis, and rare diseases. So just to say that this is not just about rare diseases understood as metabolic diseases, congenital diseases, and so on. This is also about neglected populations and neglected diseases. On the other hand, I think it was bevacizumab, who it's a oncological treatment that basically accounts with 14 orphan designations in the US, which means or translates into more than 20 years of monopoly beyond patent extension. As I was saying, the last issue is related to systemic issues on the broader R&D ecosystem, which is basically that it neglects diseases, mostly outside oncology, and populations. And the R&D ecosystem has mostly focused on oncological treatments and smaller and smaller subpopulations of cancer treatments. So we decided in Salud por Derecho to just use a mini case study on how CAR-T development shows these problems with the rare disease ecosystem. We did it because CAR-T therapies, all of the CAR-T therapies approved by the FDA and the EMA are designated as orphan drugs, except for Breyanzi's application in the EU, which was voluntarily withdrawn from by the developer. Because for us it made sense and it seemed like a good case for a progressive government to align national and international policy priorities. And third, also because we thought that the governance of new technologies and personalized medicine is a neglected area in global health, excluding perhaps mRNA vaccines and mRNA platforms in the context of biosecurity and pandemic response. Just 3 slides very quickly on what we saw. We analyzed the data from the US registry on orphan drugs and the EU registry, basically just to find out that for all CAR T therapies approved, there's an average of 10 years, slightly more, 10.14 additional years of exclusivity in the US and almost 11 years of exclusivity in the EU, thanks to the orphan incentives. And this is something that is completely absent in the resolution. Each of the CAR T therapies has between 9 and 2 orphan designations in the US, sorry, and between 4 and 1 in the European Union. In the US, in the EU, it's not possible to know this, but in the US, CAR T therapies enjoy on average almost 1.5 years more years of monopoly, and almost 3 orphan designations more than other orphan drugs. With regards to price tags, and we got information from Spain, list prices, not net prices, so it doesn't account for confidential discounts granted by the industry. Most treatments are priced at more or less between 260,000 euros and almost 350,000 euros per patient per treatment, with one exception that you might find on the right-hand side, which is RE001, which is the CAR T developed in the public sector in Spain, which costs 2/3 less than the commercial alternatives, which is the reason why we thought that Spain would push for a more, let's say, a progressive view in the text of the resolution. When we looked at how clinical trials were done for most commercial CAR T therapies, we saw that basically nowhere except for high-income countries, China and Brazil, there was clinical trials with commercial CAR Ts being done, which is also something completely absent in the current resolution text. On the other hand, it also shows some of the concerns with regards to the efforts needed to transfer technology from high-income countries to other countries with less capacities to produce and develop CAR T and other ITMPs in the future. So just to tie this up with the resolution text, the resolution does not address the systemic issues that impede access to medicines, universal healthcare. Universal healthcare for rare diseases, it's referenced a lot throughout the resolution text, but it doesn't include any kind of mention to the impact that regional incentives like the Orphan Drug Act in the US and the EU, and the lack of transparency have in expanding access to medicines, impeding access to orphan drugs. The text sends a message that equitable access to medicines is a national health priority for Spain, but for the country, it's definitely not a global health priority, without any kind of clear references in the text, but with many references in the national context. And we see the health minister referencing the case of the publicly developed CAR T therapy a lot as an example of affordable treatment. It does not address issues related to technology and knowledge transfer. And this is something that is kind of mainstream nowadays in global health. Geneva talks with the negotiations of the pandemic treaty that have highlighted how essential technology transfer is to ensure equity and justice across countries of all income level. And finally, one thing that we really pushed and tried to convince the government to include in the text with very little success from what I've seen, is that it doesn't include issues related to regulatory matters, such as the regulation of individualized production of quality and effective advanced therapies, which is what, in the end of the day, and this would maybe be a matter of subject for another webinar in the future, but is what made the case of Spain developing publicly developed CAR T therapies a case of success. And with this, thank you very much again, all of you, for attending, and all the organizers for inviting me. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Adrian. Just before we move into Tiro, I would just like to remind you to speak slowly because of the interpretation that we have. And would also point you to the comments that Tiro has shared in the chat of an article that was published today on Politico that gives some background on the context of the resolution tabling by Spain. So Tiro, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much to Third World Network. Can you hear me? Yeah, and actually, I believe you might have been just shared some text. If you could please project that. So I'll remember to speak slowly.
Yes, just a sec. For some reason, it's not.
While we're doing that, I'll just want to give an update. So sort of what hopefully we'll get to see. And I can tell you it'll be, I'm only seeing this really for the first time myself, is that today between 11 to 1 p.m. Geneva time, there was another consultation on this rare diseases resolution convened by Egypt and Spain. And I was just told actually that it's actually before the EB, the last consultation, which, at the time that I basically asked somebody, well, does that mean everything is green or what's the status? And, we'll see with the text that will be projected soon. But basically, okay, so what we're seeing now, and I think perhaps some of us might be seeing it for the first time, I certainly am. I believe this should be the January 16th text, so basically based on the negotiations from Thursday, but it should also say with the new chair's proposal. Like, is that the document? Okay, great. So basically, there's at least one important reservation that we'll see towards the end, that basically I believe the European Union, Canada, and the United States talked about, meaning bracketing language on within available resources. And now we see a lot of green text. That means that text is consensus. And some of you who've followed the, let's say, pandemic treaty negotiations and other WHO processes have seen blue text and yellow text. But one other interesting aspect of it is you'll see purple text. And initially I wasn't quite sure what that was. And but then I dug a bit and I looked into it rather, and I was told that actually, and you'll see that the purple text is basically what is proposed by the two co-chairs, one of which is in this case Egypt and Spain. So what's the date today is, like, remind me again, is it the 21st, right?
Yes.
Or yeah, no, sorry. Like, the reason I'm asking, just asking myself about that is that basically the executive board, excuse me, will take place very soon, in a matter of weeks, from the 3rd of February to the 11th of February. So, and also just basically in the context of, let's say, geopolitics, we've heard of the United States and the executive order pulling out of WHO. So there's just in light of that, in addition to the points raised by Gopa and Adrian in basically in relation to the fact that there are no real access provisions, and one thing we certainly know is that okay, so this resolution came forth in November of 2024, but even before it was officially submitted, the Lancet on November 2nd, and if you go to page 1, you will see a reference to the Lancet in the footnote, I believe. Yeah, right there. Editorial, November 2nd. And the reason I bring up that data is that the Lancet, they apparently were well informed, because their editorial, it was basically praising this initiative. But even before it was officially submitted to WHO, they named the countries who were co-sponsoring this resolution, which that's quite interesting. I would just point that out. But even in that early process, there was one member state in the core group that had put in language, consensus, based on consensus language, one on transparency. And as maybe Ariane had mentioned, Spain was one of the co-sponsors of the transparency resolution of 2019. And and also there was language on TRIPS flexibilities, and basically Spain at the time basically said, no, let's not go with that. We need to have consensus, and let's go under the radar kind of thing. And one other thing I would say that, having observed these processes for, let's say, 2 decades, one thing that's also really missing in this text is any mention of delinkage, which is something that we've seen in many resolutions since about 2006. So I don't have much to add right now, but I just wanted, maybe what we could do is just before, because I know Chetali also will provide her insights, but maybe, because I know there are a lot of people on this in this webinar, but maybe we could spend some time just looking at the text, if people want. But otherwise, I'd be happy to turn over to Chetali.
Thank you, Tiru. And I'm sorry, I confused the order. Chetali was supposed to come before you, and then you would close. I'm so sorry. So we'll give the floor to her, and then maybe if you want to go back, Tiru, that would be completely fine. So please, Chetali, I'm sorry, and go ahead.
Thanks, Anya. It was good. In fact, Hiru came before me because he made everybody go through the text at least once. So I will now tell what are the things that we are actually pressing in to include inside this resolution, and why I'll give this overview from an access perspective as to why we are pushing for the things that Thiru and Adrian set the floor for, and why we are missing on those things. So thanks, Thiru and Adrian, for providing and Gopa for providing the springboard, and I'll just talk about it from an access perspective. So why do we think that there is, though everybody should have access to drugs, but it's good that we have a resolution, and now it will set the roadmap for how things should be taken over it. But there are some critical elements which are completely missing in this resolution. So if we talk about rare diseases, there is a substantial patient need, in the sense that we have more than 350 million people who currently are suffering from rare diseases. And at the moment, it's like 50% of these affected are children. In fact, rare diseases is one of the most prominent cause of mortality among the children. So what is the most pressing point that is there in the cases of rare diseases? Is that it's a completely neglected area, and the drug availability in this area is very, very worse. It's not like other resolutions that come forward. For examples, we have NCDs, resolutions for diabetes and all those coming up. Those areas are very different from this because at least there is an availability of drug, but here the drug availability is very worse. So we have 90% of these diseases that currently have no treatment available for them, and it's only for the 5% of it that we have treatments that are available. And even for those areas where the treatments are available, they are prohibitively expensive. So recently, in a few decades, we've seen the prices of drugs rising like anything. They're getting steeper and steeper and steeper, but nothing in context of what we see in the cases of rare diseases. The newest drugs that come for rare diseases are pegged at a price of like 4.25 million, an amount which is like a normal average person can earn through his lifetime. Such this kind of a disease, and we expect the patient's families to pay such a price for the treatment for their children. Especially, this is a very, very pressing problem in low and middle income countries. So, where most of the pocket, like more than 50% of the expenditure for people from these countries actually come from out of pocket expenditure. So, for those countries where these drugs are not included in the healthcare budget system, it's very important that such a resolution is in place, because though the resolution speaks about a universal health coverage, but the problem with that is that to include the drugs which are so expensive in the budgets is a struggle for all the countries, especially in the LMICs. So you look at the prices at which the drugs are pegged. You see Libledi at 4.25, then Hemgenix again for hemophilia at 3.5. Elvidis, which is for boys suffering from Duchenne muscular dystrophy, it is 3.2 million. You have Lyfgenia, which is for sickle cell disease, and we know there are a number of people suffering from sickle cell globally. It is priced at 3.1 million. Similarly, the last two drugs, if you look at Zolgensma for spinal muscular atrophy, at one time this was touted to be as one of the most expensive drugs, 2.32 million, and Casgevy again for sickle cell anemia. But you look at how the prices of these drugs are being rising steeply. So wherever in these areas, even the drugs are available, they are super expensive for anybody to afford. So it is not the case that the companies are not manufacturing the drugs. If I look at the new drug approvals that was just released by the US FDA a few weeks back, out of the 50 NCs that were approved by FDA this year, 26 of them were for rare diseases. So this accounts for 52% of the NC approval was for rare diseases. But this innovation that we are seeing is not translating into accessibility. So there is a complete inaccessibility. And looking at the fact that when a drug for a rare disease is approved, you have a lot of tax rebates coming. Earlier, it was 50%. Now, with the new reforms, it's like 25%. Additionally, you have patent term extensions. You have extended exclusivity for these drugs that come over. So there are.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Just to remind you to speak a little bit more slowly because of the invitation.
Sure.
Thank you.
So if you look at we cannot say that there is no innovation in this. The companies are definitely innovating, but at the same time, if you look at the prices that they are putting for these drugs, it is again very, very high. So this is a study which is a little older. It was till 2007 and 17, and in 2017 also they were saying the average price of the drug for a rare diseases is approximately 25 times more than those for a normal traditional drugs. Now, this is 17, and after 17, we've seen the prices going in millions. So now the number is so high. So we can clearly see that innovation and inaccessibility both are there. But so what are we actually expecting from this resolution? What we actually should be pushing for this resolution is that we need transparencies in the cost of development and production of medicines. Another thing is we need member states to use the TRIPS flexibilities to protect public health. And third is also we need a language to support tech transfer. Like my colleague Adrian just said in his presentation before, I will delve on each of these points individually and try to explain as to why we need to push for all these factors in this resolution. One is regarding the transparency on the cost and development. We all know that whenever pharma companies come forward, whenever it's that the prices for these drugs are extremely high, they do come up and often state that tough studies. We've seen that in a lot of cases in India also, that they're always coming with the same figure of 2.8 billion. So to bust that myth, I've just put forward this slide as to why we need the transparency in the cost of these drugs. So, for example, there is a drug called Trikafta, which is a drug, miracle drug for patients who are suffering from cystic fibrosis. Now, cystic fibrosis numbers are extremely high. So, if you look at the price of this drug, it is said that it is 327,000 US dollars per patient per year. Now, the cost of this production, according to the researchers, was found that the cost of production of Trikafta is estimated to be only 5,000 US dollars, which is almost 90% lower than the US list price of this medicine. So if you look at the margin that the companies are taking on the price of this, where drugs are not available, where the patients are suffering, where these diseases are not a part of the public healthcare system, and the countries, low and middle income countries, are really struggling to put them into their public health system. It is very, very difficult to have and it is like, it is so skewed that there is a markup of this much on the amount of prices. That it is for this reason that there should be a transparency in the cost of research and development. Similarly, if we talk about Risdiplam, the price for the drug is 80,000 US dollars per patient per year. And according to one of the studies that was submitted by Dr. Melissa Barber, it was found that the cost of manufacture is as low as $34 per year. So that is the kind of, and that too, it was with the markup. So this was actually submitted as, this was also submitted in one of the court cases that is currently going in India. So this is the kind of markup that we see in cases of rare diseases, and that is why it is very important to push the transparency factor into the resolution. Now, if we talk about the second factor, which is the member states' rights to use flexibilities, why are we pushing for for this to be a part of the resolution? Is because you look at the patent landscape of cystic fibrosis drug that I just showed you. Uh, the entire Trikafta, the molecule Trikafta, which I just talked about, this is a patent landscape that we did in India, and this is a TWN internals analysis. So we did, and all the components of the Trikafta is a component of 3 drugs. All the 3 drugs are patent protected in India. And if you look at the fact that Vertex, the pharmaceutical manufacturer who is producing Trikafta, has not even bothered to register the drug in India. There is no unit of Trikafta that has been imported into the country. And India, it is said that there may be 45,000. In one of the studies, it was said that India may have an undiagnosed population of more than 45,000 people who are currently suffering from cystic fibrosis. And no Trikafta is available in India, not even at the price that is available in US. But the company has patented completely the entire patent landscape. All components of it are patented. And even they've resorted to a lot of secondary evergreening, where you can see polymorphic forms. They are not allowed under the Indian patent law, but still salt forms of the compounds. You have you have different kinds of patents that are being filed on Trikafta. So this is how they are misappropriating the patent system also without bringing any of the drugs. So that is why we are pushing for TRIPS flexibilities, because at least if the TRIPS flexibility is there, the member states do have a right, or the member states can exercise their right under the flexibilities to produce a generic version of these drugs. So, for example, if I say, Adrian just talked about gene therapy. In India, gene therapy patents are not allowed under the flexibilities. India has used that and not allowed. And consequently, if you look at, India has made strides in the development of gene therapy for sickle cell disease. So they are planning to enter into patient trials from this year onwards. So the cost for gene therapy, we all know, is very expensive if we go globally. And India is now entering into patient trials for this disease and for sickle cell, and the cost would definitely be much lower than what it is globally. To give an example of how the cost, if you use the TRICS flexibilities, how the cost decreases can be clearly seen from the example of CAR T cell therapies, which Adrian just touched about. So if you look at 2 of the CAR T therapies that are available in US, One is Kymriah by Novartis, and the other is Yescarta by Gilead. So if you look at the prices of these drugs, they are $600,000 for Kymriah and 500,000, more than $500,000 for Yescarta. Now, both these are CAR T cell therapies, which are so expensive in US. But if you talk about in India does not allow CAR T therapy patents to be patented in India because they treat it as a method of treatment. So under TRIPS flexibilities, they do not allow it to be patented. So India has indigenously produced CAR T therapies, and the price of that is 40,000 US dollars. So, and they are planning to bring the cost to much, much lower than this. They are still working on it and trying to bring that. This is why we are pushing that TRIPS flexibilities should be included in it, so that at least member states have the provision and have the leeway, or maybe they have that elbow, which we talk about, to at least use it when it is required. Because if you look at the cost of the drugs that are being produced for rare diseases, they are very, very expensive. But obviously, countries like India and others have the capability to produce them at a much lower price, as we see in the example of CAR T therapies. So I think that is where these two provisions become very important to be included in the resolution. So I think Adrian already talked about the tech transfer thing, so I'm not touching upon that. I think that that is why the points that we talked about are very important to be included in the resolution. Thank you. I think now it's over to Gopal.